Like union members, Trump is also enjoying a level of support from Hispanic voters, Republicans seldom seen, if ever seen. The latest GE poll, the national GE poll commissioned by Fox News, shows that Trump is leading Kamala by just 1% amongst the national vote. But when you look at the Hispanic voters, the lead is 6%, 52 to 46, against something back in 2016. If you suggested this, you'd be thrown into some sort of an asylum, Kosha.
The Hispanic vote is really interesting because it's the fastest growing demographic in the US. And Trump has made inroads with them. I think Bush actually did quite well with them, maybe surprising to many. And then after that, Republicans don't do that well.
No.
Trump did. He raised and grew his support with them in 2020 versus 2016. And if that trend holds, given that that group is growing and they are in some of those battleground states, there are certainly pockets of them, it could be quite interesting. I think, it is his policies on the economy and all of that. A lot of them are small business owners, and that resonates with them. Also, it's a personality, sort of that machismo aspect of the Trump personality, I think resonates a lot, certainly with Hispanic men.
And I think also when it comes to the culture wars, because that demographic tends to be socially conservative. They do not like all this pronoun indoctrination in schools, all the extremes that elements of the left, particularly in the Democrats, have gone. I think that would be leaving a lot of them uncomfortable, and not just Hispanic voters, but a lot of other migrant groups. And this is something, again, the left, the media, activists don't seem to understand. There's a marked difference between legal migrants and illegal immigrants. And legal migrants are often the ones who are most vehemently against illegal immigration.
Absolutely, because they know what it's like to have gotten in and what a gift it is to come from the countries that they come from and to be in here. And they're probably even more offended, I think, by others from where they come from cutting the line and crossing over illegally.
Especially if they don't have those shared values, they don't have the work ethic, perhaps. That's, I think, all part of it. Now, let's talk about the economic credentials of Kamala Harris's VP pick. A prominent business leader and Shark Tank host Kevin O'Leary has slammed Tim Walz's record as governor of Minnesota.
I'm looking at the track record of an individual who came into a state and wiped out job creation. He wiped out job creation in professional, in manufacturing, in accounting, in every subcategory you look at. Those jobs moved to South Dakota and North Dakota. The South Dakota job rate right now is 4 times that of Minnesota. Minnesota only creates jobs in services that are funded by the government, healthcare and social services. Every other sector is in decline. He's also added a surcharge of 1%, 100 basis points, on top of 9.8% taxes on individuals that are retiring. And of course they're leaving the state in drones.
Kosha, that seems to be true for many leftist governments, including right here in Australia, particularly here in Victoria. The jobs growth tend to be taxpayer-funded jobs whilst businesses are fleeing. And that data comparing North and South Dakota to Minnesota is very interesting.
It is, and indeed, some would say that's by design with left-leaning governments and not by defect, because it shores up their power structure if you have more and more people dependent on the government, including for their jobs. The thing that the U.S. has, it's really a built-in structural advantage that is less so here, is it has 50 states, so there's more of that option for mobility, interstate mobility, than there is, given Australia's structure. And you see that where Minnesota, I think, is in the top 15 states with outflowing migration, people fleeing. So New York, California are at the top. But Minnesota is, just as that mentions, and it definitely accelerated under his watch for a lot of his policies, economic, COVID, and everything else. So I think that's a point the other team should keep hitting on.
And I don't think it's a coincidence that many of the top 10 states that citizens are fleeing from tend to be blue, and the ones they go to tend to be red. Florida, Texas, Tennessee, one of the biggest beneficiaries of that domestic migration. And you mentioned New York, California, Minnesota. Now, let's talk a little bit more about Tim Walz. He's also under fire for a massive COVID-19 fraud that happened under his watch as Minnesota governor. More than $250 million of federal money was defrauded, and it was one of the largest pandemic-era fraud schemes anywhere in the US. The alleged perpetrators used a Minnesota-based non-profit organisation called Feeding Our Future, which the Minnesota Department of Education was supposed to be overseeing. They did a very poor job of that overseeing. It's astonishing that this went on for so long on such a grand scale without it being nipped in the bud. And you looked at the details, it wasn't a particularly sophisticated program. You would have thought it would have been spotted early.
Yes, I think, it goes to just when there's so much money sloshing around, as there was, especially in the wake of COVID, and there's no accountability with these bloated organizations. Things that shouldn't slip through the cracks do, or people look the other way, or they're hamstrung, or what other reasons are. Politically, I'm not sure this one will land as potently against Walz as others, just because it's more of an indirect indictment of his leadership. Overall, he was overseeing the state, but he wasn't in the nitty-gritty of this particular thing. There are far more other direct indictments of him, as we just discussed, the mass exodus of people leaving Minnesota and his policies on various issues.
Well, putting tampons in boys' restrooms. You've got the stolen valor issue. Yeah. We've got him talking up socialism as being neighbourly. The list is long. Kamala Harris, as you mentioned, she is flying at the moment, getting enormously positive press, doing so much better in the polls than Joe Biden was. But is this Walz decision going to cause her damage? Because there just seems to be more and more that comes out with him, and you wonder if he was properly vetted.
I do think that the vetting is an issue because of how this whole thing went down, and they were pretending to support Biden for as long as they did, and then this last-minute switcheroo. So now you've got what would happen in 18 months condensed in 90 days. So I'm sure they knew these things, but they didn't have the time to really vet it. And these people, she herself, have never been through a competitive primary process or anything else. So there's plenty there, as you say, it's a long list. Yeah. But she's got this clear strategy of running out the clock, getting very favorable media or no media. And that seems to be what's on the ballot.
I think she's counting on a honeymoon all the way to November. Kosha Gada, thank you so much for your time this evening.